Hey everybody, it's Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the podcast / video series where I just get to chit chat with other writers. Sometimes I know the writers, I invite them to be on the show. Sometimes I know of them, like today's guest, but I've never met them. And sometimes I have no clue who they are. They just seemed interesting. But in any case, I usually don't do a lot of prep work for this show. I definitely use some, but I want the conversation to be organic, and I don't want it to be just focused on a book that they wrote. I want to know about them. And I find, that begets kind of, I think, the more interesting conversations. And today was no exception. Today was great. So today I had a real heavy hitter on. Laurie R was on the show today. And, she's the New York Times bestselling author of 30 books, including the Mary Russell-Sherlock Holmes stories. Has been working in the mystery, thriller, suspense kind of genre, and just is really well known. Has won pretty much any award that you can name in the writing world, particularly in the mystery thriller writing world. She's won all those awards. And so sure, I was a little intimidated. But she was great, and she opened up a lot. She was such interesting comments about how she writes, how she perceives mystery writing and suspense writing in general. We talked a lot about, balancing emotion versus balancing plot. And I thought that was kind of an interesting conversation. So yeah, and then we told a really bizarre story at the end that included a cat and some X-Lax. So if that's not a good teaser to keep you listening, I don't know what is. But I loved it. I thought it was a fantastic conversation. I really appreciated her time, and I will say her new book just came out. It's Back to the Garden, and it looks fantastic. It just came out September 6th. So please check that out. I think you're going to enjoy this one, everyone. This is my conversation with Laurie R. How are you?
Hey, I'm good.
Good. Thanks for joining. This is a very special episode because I have COVID.
Oh, good. So don't breathe on me, right?
Yeah. So that's where 2.5 years, nothing. And, vax boosted, all that stuff. And just kind of randomly got it last week. So,
you feeling okay?
Yeah, dude, it's been like a mild summer cold at most. Okay. And so, yeah, the vaccines are doing their work, but it's, if I have to mute every now and then to cough and I have a cough drop, then you'll know that's the reason why.
I have throat coat tea.
Throat coat tea is great.
It's really so great. I travel with it because, whenever. But I had a cold a couple of weeks ago that I got. The one place you cannot mask is the dentist office.
Oh, interesting.
So I got it at the dentist office, but it was relatively mild, except occasionally you'd go on these horrible jags of coughing and hacking and.
But that was just a cold?
4 days running for COVID, and it never showed up positive, so I figured.
Yeah, it's weird. Who gets colds anymore? You don't even think that's a thing that exists. It's either COVID or nothing.
I had to get a flu shot because I thought, oh yeah, that's a thing, isn't it?
Right. That's still here. That's still around. I know. Last year was crazy because all I did was get vaccines. I got my shingles vaccine. I got the flu shot. I got the COVID.
Yes,
it was jabbed so many times last year.
The pneumonia one, yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So you're in California, is that right?
Yep. Yeah.
Whereabouts?
Surf City, Santa Cruz.
Santa Cruz, beautiful. Yeah. The banana slugs, right?
Go slugs!
I grew up in Ventura County, and then I spent a few years up in San Francisco. So Northern California got a great place in my parents lived in Walnut Creek and Alamo. So yeah, that's beautiful up there.
Yeah, I was we lived in Walnut Creek when I was born, although
okay.
I didn't, by the time I think that the only hospital was in in Alameda. So I was actually born in Alameda, though we never lived there. So
It has changed a lot. I'm sure the real estate's a lot more valuable now than it was.
oh yeah.
Yeah, Walnut Creek's kind of crazy. So what were you like just growing up? Like what were your parents doing? Why were you in that area?
Well, we moved around a lot.
Okay.
My mother agreed to marry my father because she looked at at his parents, and they'd lived in the same house for 35 years. And she thought, she came from a broken home. I mean, divorce was really shameful
Sure.
in 20s and 30s. So she wanted real stability. And so she married my father. And yeah, no. We moved pretty much every year. So
Wow. So there was just discord, basically.
He just, family story had it that he would read his way through a library and need to move on to the next town. And I mean, he just kept moving. We never bought a house when I was a kid. We never owned a house. He was in real estate. He was in real estate, and we never owned a house.
Interesting.
And we lived here, and we lived up in the Puget Sound area, and
But they stayed together during your childhood?
Yeah. They separated for a bit, but they got back together again. So
yeah, because again, that's kind of what you did. Divorce wasn't really an option. I mean, it could be, but it was pretty uncommon.
A lot tougher. I mean, we could have managed, but yeah.
And did you grow up with siblings or?
Yeah, I have an older sister and a younger brother. My older sister actually lives with me now. She and her husband have a unit, have a house, and at some point they one of the owners converted the garage into a 2-story separate unit. So they live there, and we, it works well because I can just go away. And in the days when we used to travel, I could just go away, and they would be there for anything. And we have dinner together, and so it's just sort of, it's a good situation.
Have you and you just haven't been traveling because of COVID, obviously?
Yeah, I mean, the first time I got on a plane for 2 years was in the spring, was the conference. So
how was that? Was that scary?
It just felt weird because it felt normal, but it was also, you had to remember all the stuff.
Right.
Like, all right, you check in online.
Right. Totally. And it's I've been studying so it's the same thing. I've been studying a little bit of the airline industry because it's fascinating to me, but everyone's complaining now, like how terrible air travel is and how long the delays are. And really, it's no different than it was in 2018, 2019. It's just people aren't used to the misery that is travel. Yeah. It's a pain. I've been doing it just a little bit. I'm like, I don't like airports. I don't like the whole I like being somewhere. I love being somewhere.
Yeah. You look at the old pictures of the Pan Am where the stewardesses are bringing you food and they're carving a beef roast.
Right. And you were dressed up, right? You would dress up for air travel because it was like an event.
Yeah.
Are you traveling to BoucherCon next week?
Yep. I'll see you there.
I will. Yeah. I'll be there for like a day and a half.
I have Scottsdale, Barbara Peters in Scottsdale this weekend. So I go tomorrow. We're doing a sort of pre-pub event with her on tomorrow, Saturday. And then a couple of Bay Area things, and then BoucherCon on Thursday. So
yeah, nice. And
so are you gonna make it? Are you okay?
Yeah, I first tested positive last Saturday. So I'm assuming I'm going to be, I'm not going to do anything until I test negative on a rapid test, but I assume that'll be probably in the next few days. So it should be fine. And if I had to cancel, it's not the end of the world. So just going back to you growing up, do you kind of see anywhere that root of influence, that root of creativity? Like, where was there a spark somewhere that you just loved to read books, or you were moving around a lot, so libraries were comforting to you? Or
sure, libraries were home.
Yeah.
When we, I think I had maybe two years in all my school career where I was in the same school in September that I'd been in June.
Wow.
So between shifting towns and shifting schools, one or the other, I just never had any continuity. And after a while, you think, I'm just not going to bother making friends.
Yeah.
They're only here for a period of time, and then you go on and you have to do it again. So it was much, much easier and more comforting to make your friends in the library. So
Yeah.
I read. I was one of those. We would go to the library every week. Everybody would bring home a stack of books. You'd read it as you were walking to the car.
Right.
And so yeah, it was. Fiction was where I lived.
Interesting. And you wonder, like, with that kind of transitory nature of your childhood, how else that might manifest itself as you get older, right? Like this idea that, I'm not going to bother to make friends because they're going to be gone in a year anyway. I wonder if that roots itself somewhere in you where you approach other things in life with kind of that, almost that caution.
I suppose so. Certainly when it came to my own kids, I was very firm that the kids would not be given the same background that I was.
Yeah.
So, my kids grew up in the same school district. They actually live in the same county where they, were born.
Yep. Same
now,
with mine. Yeah.
Which is unusual in this day and age. But, I think that some degree of continuity is necessary, and I think it's really cruel on children to continually kick them up and down and up and down. And I'm sure that it has to do, with the fact that my friends don't tend to be people I see a lot of.
Mm-hmm.
I don't tend to think of making friends in my local community because I'm hanging out with people at conferences. My colleagues and stuff I see once or twice a year, and they're good friendships. They're just distant friendships. Well, of course, in the last 3 years,
right,
what with COVID and lockdown and everything else, everybody is gone online and distant, so it's not really unusual.
And I think that changes, as you progress through adulthood, right? Like your need for that social interaction. Like, it's the point now where somebody might say, "Hey, there's a guy who I think you guys would really hit it off. You'd be good friends." And I'm like, I don't really need more friends. I'm happy to sit down with somebody, but it just feels like a lot of work. So I'm the same way.
Yeah. You sort of think, should I make a friend? You read these stories about people who live longer, whose lives are happier when they're in their 70s because they have close ties and friendships, and you think, yeah, maybe I gotta get myself one of them.
But I think I totally believe in the antithesis of that, which is like that loneliness is pervasive and is the root of a lot of medical and mental issues. But there's a difference between being abjectly lonely and then just being, I'm comfortable with just a couple people I hang out with every now and then, and I'm happy with myself. So you kind of have to judge that for yourself. But I know some people, man, it's just they get home, turn on the TV, and just get fed news and go to bed angry and wake up sad. And it's terrible.
But none of them are writers, right?
No, writers don't go to the TV. They go to the bottle. So what all these books you're reading growing up, were they mysteries or were they just all across the board?
Oh, I don't think I really started reading mysteries seriously until I started writing them.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
If you told me, I started writing when I was in my 30s.
Me too.
And if you had told me 5 years earlier, Laurie, you're going to be a writer, when you grow up, you're going to be a writer. I would have assumed that you meant science fiction, because
that's interesting.
That was my most consistent, regular read was science fiction. But when time came to actually telling stories, I found it baffling how you could structure anything. I mean, science fiction can go anywhere.
Right.
And you don't have any rules at all. And I found that as a writer, I needed I needed the bones that I could hang a story on. I needed a basic skeleton. And of course, there's a wide spectrum of within our genre.
Sure.
From the very cozy intellectual detective figuring stuff out whodunit to the high pulse, oh God, would the world be saved thriller at the other end. But they all have the sorts of rules that give them a guide to how they work. So if you're writing a whodunit, you have a body and you have investigators and you have suspects and red herrings and clues and the the scene in the library when you tell whodunit. And I found that structure, even though my first book really didn't follow it, it nonetheless gave me a sort of mental guide, because I'm not an outliner. I don't outline.
Me neither.
I need a sort of internal structure that I'm following. I think that for those of us who don't outline, I don't know about you, but I strongly feel as I'm writing that some part of me knows where this damn book is going.
Yeah, you hope your subconscious is working in the background. That's all you can hope for.
Yeah, and you sort of, there are times when I am working my way through a first draft, and I mean, I don't really believe in writer's block per se.
Me neither.
But there are times when you really would rather go clean the oven.
Right.
And you find excuses to go and do other things. And I have learned that quite often that's a sign that the little voice in the back of my head that's telling me what comes next in the story has seen that things are going awry. And they are I'm beginning to get in difficulty that I haven't seen yet. So when I find myself clearing out my third closet, I think, oh, hey, there must be something going on with this story.
Yeah.
So I go back to it and read it with with a clear eye, read it cold, just read it rather than read it with a pencil in your hand. And I will begin to see that I've lost the way, which tells me that there is a way there to begin with.
Right.
That somebody in the back of my head knows where it's going. So those of us who are organic rather than organized outliners have that very clear sense of an outline, but it just doesn't necessarily come out on a separate page.
Right.
Or post-it notes or whatever people use for outline.
And it's interesting what you say about the cleaning out the closets, because I'm the same way. I don't outline, and my first draft is I just want to just throw things at these characters and see how they feel, and worry about kind of the plot later. But there are days when you sit down and it's not fun, but that's also it's because it's a job too, right? It can't always be this amazing muse-centric experience. A lot of days writing's really tough and it's boring, but you have to discern between, is this boring just because I'm just not feeling it today, or is it, to your point, something's telling me I'm not excited about this because it's not the direction it should go. So it does take time to parse those differences. I don't think I can identify those differences very easily.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and as you say, I mean, there are times when you just have to slog.
Right.
There's also times I kind of figure that there are enough disadvantages to self-employment, whether it's as a writer or whatever.
Right.
There are enough disadvantages to it that you should take advantage of the few things that you got going for you. That is, your time is your own. You can decide if this isn't a day where you feel like writing, then don't write.
Right.
So long as you're getting a book written, doesn't matter if you have a Tuesday when you're not producing your 1,500 words. Well, it does if you're working up against a deadline. On the other hand, most of us who've been in it, I mean, I got 30 books out there. Most of us have a very clear sense of how long it's going to take you to get something done.
Right.
I mean, I've had friends who are so structured as writers that you cannot drop in and visit them on a morning because they write in the morning, period.
Mm-hmm.
And if you happen to be in town and you haven't seen them in 3 years and it's a morning, sorry, they're writing. And
No.
I think, why take the worst part of an office job?
Right. I'm sorry, my boss didn't give me the time off.
Yeah, without the medical benefits or the retirement pay.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because on the other side of that spectrum are all the aspiring writers who just can't get that first draft done.
Yeah.
And to me, I've learned, because I also have a full-time job in addition to my writing, I've learned out of necessity how to do it. And to me, it's an hour a day, 7 days a week, and I can get a book done in less than a year.
Yeah.
God willing. But I need that structure. And so I do have, my 5 o'clock hour is fairly sacrosanct, but it's not unwavering. I would see a friend who I haven't seen in 3 years, in order to do that. But that consistency is so necessary. Otherwise, you just don't get it done.
This was an interesting part of, I co-edited the Mystery Writers of America handbook, the new handbook.
Oh yeah.
How to Write a Mystery with Lee Child. Lee Child and I edited it. And one of the things that we were aiming for in the book is this dialogue between writers of how I do it. Because if you're hanging out in a bar with writers and the subject comes up, which it doesn't usually, admittedly, in a bar, you got other things to talk about. But if the subject were to come up about how you write or how you structure your day, 10 writers, you'd have 11 different
Totally.
stories. And I think one of the things that newbies really need to understand is that everybody is inventing the life of being a writer in their own way. For me, it works in one way because I happen to be a fairly rapid writer.
Mm-hmm.
So if I take a couple of days off, long term, it's not going to have an impact. If I were strapped down and only had 1 hour a day, like Garda Wilson, that's a different matter, isn't it?
Yeah.
That you have to take the work seriously. Even if you're not taking yourself seriously, you got to take the work seriously. Otherwise, it's not work. It's just
right. And you have to allow yourself to find your own path. Yeah, because so for example, for me, I fell into writing. Like I literally on a day when I was 33, I started writing out of the blue, no background. I didn't know what I was doing, but it was a meaningful moment, but I had to learn. And part of that was like, do I read books about writing? And I quickly kind of realized like, they're telling me way too many different things. And it's overwhelming to me. And I don't want to follow this guidebook. And so I found my own way. It took years and lots of novels. But so when you're co-editing that How to Write a Mystery, do you have that same thought a little bit of like, I can tell you how, we approach it, but that doesn't mean this is the only way to write a mystery.
Oh, absolutely. That's why one of the things, of course, on a handbook is you have to talk about outlining. But so we had Jeff Deaver wrote the chapter on outlining, and we titled it "You Must Outline," because that's Jeff's approach. Is if you're not outlining, you're not doing it correctly. The following chapter in the book is by Lee Child, and the title of that one is "Never Outline."
It's so
I think
frustrating as an aspiring writer to read that, though.
Yeah. And I think, anytime that you're teaching a class, when you're writing an article, you're talking to a beginner about writing, obviously they are looking for the way to do it. And like you say, I mean, I started writing in my 30s too, and I was looking for the way to do it. And going to one of my first events was a group event at a local bookstore. And there were three of us, and two of us write similarly. And the third guy, who'd written a whole load of books, said that he wrote 100-page outlines for each 300-page
Oh my
book.
God.
And the other woman and I looked at each other, and we both thought, we're doing this wrong. Oh, well, obviously we're not doing it wrong. I mean, I got 30 books out there now.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it was wrong for us.
Right.
Now,
Totally.
things like outlining, I mean, I find them extremely useful in the sections of books where the timeline needs to be really clear.
Mm-hmm.
So that, for example, in the current book, Back to the Garden, I needed to have certain things that you learn in the past, certain things you learn in the present, and certain things the investigator does. And so all of those need to fit very tightly together. In the first draft, they didn't. The first draft, they were all over the place. But
Right.
unfortunately,
You were getting the draft done.
Yeah, it's done. It's on a page. I can fix it. And fortunately, I have an editor who knows that my first drafts are, in the English phrase, a dog's dinner. They're a mess. They are all over the place. But we can then make a book out of it.
Right.
So one of the things that I then use, I don't use the outline structure. I tend to do either a whiteboard or Post-its or a piece of paper. However,
right.
I find that if I'm kind of locked one way, I'll just use another system. And it's sort of, if I had any ability at art at all, I probably would sketch things as well. But I find that having an idea of this needs to happen, then that, allows me to see what doors I open and shut on my way through this structure. And that's, that's kind of, my outlines tend to be for the more thriller type, both books and sequences within a suspense novel.
Do you get lost though? As you're going through it, you can, because you're talking about the clarity that you're having with your own work and recognizing, okay, this draft is a dog's dinner, but I know all these different things that need to be corrected. Do you ever get so close to it though that you can't see that? You can't see all the things. I guess that's what an editor is for, but I feel like I lose perspective.
I never get lost in my book, Carter.
That's awesome.
Yeah. No. And it's one of the reasons why I very much try not to have a pushing deadline for a book, especially close to the first draft. I try to have a period of time between finishing the first draft and picking it up again, because when you're in the heat of writing and coming up with the ideas and inventing the characters and the situations and the emotions that are going on, you are too deeply involved and you don't know what's actually on the page. In fact, quite often I'll look back at a scene and forget that I'd written it, and
totally.
oh yeah, because I don't need to introduce that clue because it's right there. 3 days ago I wrote it. But when you pick it up cold as a manuscript, and I always do printouts, I have to apologize to the world's forests because I use tons of trees on because I need to do a hard copy. Generally speaking, what I'll do is send off my first draft to my editor. She won't take an instant turnaround, which is good for me because it not only enables me to pick up, things like doing my taxes.
Mm-hmm. And it gives you space from your book too.
But when I go back to it, I can then look at it cold, and I
Yeah.
can see what I'm trying to do with the book. And it's never, I mean, it's never there, but I can always see what this book wants to be. And from there, the second draft begins to carve away bits. I don't tend to delete an awful lot because I tend to write small.
Right.
My first drafts are, oh, I suppose my first drafts are like 70 to 80,000 words.
Oh, okay.
Each drafts are closer to 90 to 100 for the longer books.
Yeah. Right.
The Russell and Holmes ones tend to be a little shorter. But so I don't tend to have a lot that I cut, but I do a lot of reorganizing, and I do a lot of realizing that here you have no idea where these people are coming from, and you don't know where they are, and you don't know certain backstory, and all those places when you're writing that, for example, this book has a lot of cop stuff in it. So I had to reach out to my police friends who know about cold case units and so forth. And there's no point in tormenting experts as you're going by continually tossing ideas out at them and then changing your mind.
Right.
So what I would do with any of the experts is I'll kind of make notes as I go of find out where this is and find out who would be in charge of that and find out the structure and then work around it. I mean, the disadvantage is that you sometimes come to depend on things that can't really happen.
Right.
And sometimes you need to redo it. And other times you just need to make a note in your afterwards saying, yeah, I know you can't do it that way, but sorry.
I mean, sometimes you're just following what, when you talk about, the good and bad of being a writer comparing to a day job, one thing for me as a writer is like, I look forward every day to that moment where I get to sit down and write, because it brings me joy, which it's very hard to find a day job that a lot of people have that same affinity for. But, so sometimes when you're writing, it's just a matter of like, I know this is a mess and I know this isn't quite working, but in this moment, this is what is bringing me joy to write, and I'll fix it later. But I think there's always something there from writing quickly or just writing from the seat of your pants that does need to come out, even if you recognize it's going to have some issues that need to be dealt with later. I mean, do you agree? Do you think that there's just some essence there that's the good way of writing as opposed to outlining?
Yeah. And I think that the first draft is a place to dump it all.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that applies especially to the emotions that you're trying to work in to there.
I was just going to say emotions. Yep.
I find that emotions are really difficult to get on the page. But if you can write something that reminds you of what emotion you are thinking about, if you can think about an emotion, that if you have a scene where you want to show that your character is vulnerable, the first draft may not do that, but it may remind you that you need to show her vulnerability and how she does have a softer side despite being this kind of thinking machine that doesn't touch many people. And that, because the emotion in writing is wound up so closely with the plot and the character and the setting and everything else, the instinct for where to put which emotion is quite often accurate, even though you're not getting the emotion quite right the first time around.
Right.
I want my character to be really frightened here, but I don't know her well enough because I haven't finished the book yet. I don't know her well enough to show what she is like when she's frightened.
Right.
But I'll put something in there that indicates that she's scared. And then when I'm going through and reading the first draft cold, I'll realize that it's inadequate, but we need it. So yeah,
it just has to be shifted somehow. But yeah, I say from my first drafts are usually very heavy, probably too heavy on emotion and less heavy on plot. And then I always have to go and change that. And it's, because I think when you read and you think about mysteries, people want to know the structure and they want to know how to solve it and all that. But if you read a mystery without emotion, it's so flat. It's just an exercise in logic, and that doesn't do anything for me personally.
I mean, early mysteries, the early whodunit, that's what they were. I mean, they were puzzles, and they were intended to be entertainments and puzzles, and nobody in them really has a full 3 dimensions.
Right.
Until you start getting into the pulps, which are all about emotion, which, again, the spectrum is still with us now, that you have the thrillers, that's all emotion. And then you have the real cozy whodunits that it's not even terribly realistic, but an interesting puzzle.
Right.
Most of us in the crime field are categorized somewhere in the middle. I mean, we call ourselves suspense.
Right.
Because suspense allows us to play with the emotion, but also the challenge of the puzzle. And that's kind of where I aim for. I think most of my books could be categorized as suspense. Also, some of them are closer to the thriller end, and some of them are closer to the detective story end.
Yeah. Yeah.
I found the way that you wrap together the emotions and the plot in I'm terrible with titles. The New Neighbor.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I loved the way that you put those together. And it's interesting to hear that you start from the other end for me, of dumping all the emotions in and then having to put in the plot.
Well, I'm flattered you read my book. Thank you very much.
Well, of course I read your books.
Do you get a lot of reading done?
I don't get a huge amount of reading done at the moment. I think that the last 3 years have changed everyone's way of reading. And I find that I've only recently got back into reading new stuff, and anything that is the least bit challenging, that is, international stories or whatever. I have spent the last 3 years heavily reading stuff that I have read before. I mean, stuff that's already on my shelves. My shelf of to be read stuff, because I buy stuff and put it on to be read. And it's enormous, because I look at a new story and I think I just can't do it.
Well, it's interesting because I think, and this, I've experienced this over COVID, is just this yearning for the past, this heavy influence of nostalgia that influences what I watch on TV. Like, I want to see a show based in the 80s. So I wonder if there's some kind of comfort for you seeking out something that you read at a time when maybe it was a happy time, it was pre-pandemic, and you're associating with that a little bit.
Yeah. And, voices that I remember from when I was getting started. I mean, Reginald Hill.
Right.
Reginald Hill isn't very well known today, but he was big when I was starting and before I was starting. And his way of telling a story is so distinct and so evocative of that time and place. And and again, sci-fi people. I love reading sci-fi because you kind of can feel safe that it's not going to have some gory serial killer dumped in the middle of it. So I reread John Scalzi and Ben Aronovich regularly, and the I'm so bad with names. The time travel Tony Taylor. Anyway, I love rereading stuff because it allows me to shut my brain off. And similarly with the television stuff that I watch, the last 3 years I watch almost nothing that is the least bit gritty. I just can't do it. I just can't go there.
Yeah.
But again, I'm beginning to get back to new things and new voices and new challenges for my poor beleaguered brain.
And well, that's just it. Everything's a commitment. So it's like, you get to a certain point, like you have to really, it's like choosing if you want to have new friends or not. Like, do I really want to read new? Like, I'm good for now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like my old friends.
Yeah, I got all the friends I need. My bookshelves are full. I don't need more.
All right, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do a really quick storytelling. This is the improv part of the episode. I've got 3 books that I just kind of chose off my bookshelves, and I'm going to have you choose one of them, and then we're going to pick a random page and a random sentence, and I'm going to read that sentence, and then that's the first sentence to whatever 2 to 3 minute short story we want to craft together.
So Carter, before you do that, I have to tell you that I once did this. I was named Artist of the Year in Santa Cruz County a number of years ago, and I said, well, what? I'm a writer. I can't do a painting exhibition. What do you want me to do? And they sort of looked puzzled too. And so I said, well, what if I write a story? And they said, oh, that's fine. I said, no. What if I write a story? And so what they did was I went and sat in a room with a live feed and every time I hit return or hit save, that section, a paragraph would appear on the screen. And there were, this crowd of people all watching my story coming. And it worked from prompts that we had asked, because I had already decided the story was going to be set in a middle school. And so I had asked a couple middle school teachers to submit prompts from their kids for things like the name of a game and the play, So anyway, there were a number of things, and I had to build the story.
The books, the books I have Beneath a Scarlet Sky by Mark Sullivan, Julie Clark's The Lies I Tell. And then I don't even remember where I got this book from, but I grabbed it. It's called Famous Last Words, and it's literally like the last words of famous people right as they were dying. so that could also be interesting. So choose one of those 3 books.
Well, shall we tell lies or shall we die? What if we tell lies? Because that's what we're doing here.
Okay. So choose a page between 1 and 300.
Well, because of the Sherlock Holmes connection, we're going to have it 221.
Baker Street.
Yeah.
And a sentence between 1 and 10.
2.
All right, I'm going to read this, and then just give me 1 or 2 sentences, whatever you feel comfortable with, and then we'll just kind of go back and forth for a couple minutes. I glance at my cell phone, silent, on the desk, and wonder where Meg is, imagining her out there, thinking she got away with it.
Meg was the most annoying person in the whole world. She put everything in one place and then assumed that the rest of the world would like to see it all in displayed as exactly she wanted it. But in fact, we wish she'd just dump it in the garbage.
Of course, Meg would think that she got away with it because she'd spent her entire life getting away with things. And a slight satisfaction began to creep over me, knowing that this time she was going to be caught and I was going to be the one to catch her.
So the fact that she had this cat that she assumed would win the prize by bribing all the judges. I mean, honestly, if she wanted to bribe the judges, she shouldn't have chosen my brother as one of them. Are you having fun, Carter?
The cat looked perfect in its cage, and it was only a few minutes before the judges were going to start coming around. She didn't know what I had in my pocket, and I ambled up next to the cage and pulled out this the tiny X-Lax pill and gave it to the cat.
Would X-Lax even work on a cat?
That's the internal monologue.
But honestly, it had to, because cats are like people, right? So 20 minutes later, there we were out in the middle of the arena, and the cat started looking very odd.
And it was time for Meg's cat to be judged. The judge took the Himalayan, the very, very long-haired Himalayan, out of its holder and picked it up and gave the stomach a slight squeeze. Just then, the cat emitted a low growl that sounded more like a haunting of horror than dissatisfaction.
And before anyone knew it, the cat's perfect long hair all fell off, and it was revealed to be a Chihuahua.
Perfect. See, now not a lot of emotion in that story, but great plot.
Well, I suppose the cat.
Laurie, what a pleasure to talk to you today. And I'm so excited for your upcoming release of Back to the Garden. That's on September 6th. Is that correct?
It is indeed.
Does it get old? Is it still as exciting as ever?
I always love it. I mean, you unpack the books and they just are so lovely.
The smell, right?
I know.
There's something about that. Well, it's great talking to you, and I look forward to seeing you hopefully next week at BoucherCon.
I hope to see you in the halls at BoucherCon.
All right. Thank you, Laurie. Take care.
Thanks, Carter.
Bye. So that's it. That was my episode with Laurie R. King. Wasn't she great? I really enjoyed that conversation. So, and I love kind of the very bizarre turn that the storytelling went. Yeah, cats. Who would have seen that coming? If you want to find out all about Laurie's books or find out more about her, you can just go to her website at laurierking.com. If you want to find out more about me, just go to my website, carterwilson.com. It's got everything in there, along with all the back episodes of this very show. So that's it for now. Thank you for watching and or listening. More episodes of Making It Up coming out soon. In the meantime, take care.